The stagecoach wheels hit another rock and Rebecca felt her teeth rattle. She gripped the wooden seat tighter as dust swirled through the small window. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Nothing but red sand and scrubby bushes as far as she could see. How much longer? She asked the driver during their last stop. Few more hours, miss. Storm's brewing, though. Might have to find shelter. Rebecca nodded and climbed back into the coach. She'd come so far from her comfortable life in Boston. Her trunk was packed with books and teaching supplies. The children in Tombstone needed a proper school, and she was determined to give it to them. The other passengers were quiet. An older man heading to his mining claim, a woman visiting her sister. Everyone looked tired from the long journey. The desert heat was getting worse even though the sun was starting to set. Then the wind started. At first it was just a gentle breeze. But within minutes it became something fierce and wild. Sand began whipping around the coach. The horses whinnied nervously. "Hold on," the driver shouted from above. The storm hit like a wall of fury. Sand filled the air so thick that Rebecca couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. The coach rocked violently from side to side. She heard the driver cursing as he fought to control the frightened horses. "There's a canyon ahead," he yelled. "We need shelter." The coach lurched to a sudden stop. Everyone stumbled out, covering their faces with whatever cloth they had. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Rebecca off her feet. Sand stung her eyes and filled her mouth with grit. "This way," someone shouted, though she could barely hear over the howling wind. She followed the voice, stumbling over rocks and fighting against the wind. Her long dress caught on thorny bushes. Her carefully pinned hair came loose and whipped around her face. The canyon walls provided some protection, but the storm was getting worse. In the chaos of swirling sand and screaming wind, Rebecca became separated from the group. She called out, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. Panic set in as she realized she was alone. The temperature was dropping fast. Her thin traveling dress, perfect for Boston's mild weather, offered no protection against the desert cold. She wrapped her shawl tighter and kept walking, hoping to find the others. Hours passed. The storm began to die down, but now she was completely lost. The desert looked the same in every direction. Stars appeared in the clear night sky, but they offered no comfort. She was cold, thirsty, and terrified. Her legs felt like they couldn't carry her another step. She stumbled and fell to her knees in the sand. Tears mixed with the grit on her face. She'd come all this way to help children, and now she was going to die alone in this wasteland. That's when she saw the glow of a small fire in the distance. Hope gave her strength to stand. She walked toward the light, praying it wasn't just her imagination. As she got closer, she could make out a figure sitting by the flames. It was a man, and he was watching her approach with alert, dark eyes. His long black hair was tied back and his skin was bronzed by the desert sun. He wore simple leather clothing and moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged in this harsh land. Rebecca stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure. She'd heard stories about the Apache people, most of them frightening tales told by nervous settlers, but this man hadn't moved to harm her. He just watched her with careful, intelligent eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the sand. "I'm lost." The man studied her for a long moment. She could see him debating with himself. Finally, he gestured for her to come closer to the fire. "Sit," he said in English, though his accent was different from any she'd heard. She sank down gratefully beside the warmth. He handed her a water container made from some kind of animal skin. The water tasted better than anything she'd ever drunk. "Thank you," she said. He nodded but didn't speak. Instead, he began preparing something over the fire. Soon the smell of cooking meat filled the air. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning. He offered her some of the cooked rabbit. She ate it hungrily, not caring about proper manners. Survival was more important than etiquette. As the night grew colder, exhaustion finally overtook her fear and uncertainty. The warmth from the fire and the food in her stomach made her drowsy. She fought to stay awake, but her body had reached its limit. "Safe," the man said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Something in his voice made her believe him. Her eyelids grew heavy. Without thinking, she leaned against his solid chest, seeking warmth and comfort. She felt his body tense in surprise, but then his arms came around her protectively. She heard him speaking in a language she didn't understand. His voice was low and rhythmic, almost like a song or prayer. The words seemed to wrap around her like a blanket, making her feel safe for the first time since the storm began. In her half-conscious state, the foreign words sounded almost like wedding vows. Something about forever, something about protection, something about binding souls, but she was too tired to think clearly. She felt something being placed around her neck and wrists. Cool metal and smooth stones that felt surprisingly heavy. In her fevered mind, she thought they must be some kind of blessing, a way to keep her safe through the night. The man continued his quiet chanting, and she drifted into the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly protected. She didn't see the conflicted look in the man's dark eyes as he gazed down at her sleeping form. She didn't know that the turquoise and silver jewelry he'd placed on her had belonged to his grandmother, saved for the woman who would become his wife. She didn't understand that according to the ancient ways of his people, by accepting the jewelry and sleeping in his arms under the stars, she had just become his bride. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying secrets that would change both their lives forever. Rebecca slept peacefully, unaware that she would wake to find her entire world transformed. The fire crackled and died down to glowing embers. The man, whose name was Thunderhawk, kept watch through the night. He knew tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and impossible choices. But for now he held the sleeping woman close and wondered how a simple act of mercy had led to something so complicated. The spirits worked in mysterious ways, his grandmother always said. Perhaps this strange white woman with the gentle face was meant to find him in the desert. Only time would tell if this unexpected meeting was a blessing or a curse for them both. Rebecca woke to the warm touch of sunlight on her face. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memories came flooding back. The storm, being lost, the mysterious man who had saved her life. She sat up slowly, expecting to feel stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard ground. Instead, she felt surprisingly rested. The fire had been rebuilt and was crackling cheerfully nearby. That's when she noticed the weight around her neck and wrists. She looked down and gasped. Beautiful silver jewelry adorned her body, a heavy necklace with intricate designs, matching bracelets, and even rings on her fingers. The pieces were set with turquoise stones that caught the morning light like trapped pieces of sky. "What is this?" she whispered, touching the necklace with trembling fingers. Thunderhawk appeared from behind a large rock, carrying a rabbit he'd caught for breakfast. When he saw her examining the jewelry, his expression became guarded. "You wear the marriage ornaments of my people," he said quietly. Rebecca's eyes went wide. "Marriage ornaments? But this must be some mistake." She started pulling at the bracelets, trying to remove them, but they seemed to be designed to stay in place. "Take them off." "I never agreed to marry anyone." Thunderhawk watched her struggle with a mixture of regret and resignation. "In your fever last night, you accepted them. You spoke words of agreement when I performed the binding ceremony." "Binding ceremony?" Rebecca's voice rose to a near shriek. "I was barely conscious. I thought you were just trying to keep me warm." "My grandmother's jewelry chooses its own wearer," he said calmly. "The spirits guided you to me in the storm. When you accepted the ornaments and slept in my arms under the stars, you became my wife according to Apache law." Rebecca shot to her feet, fury replacing her confusion. "This is ridiculous. I'm not your wife. I'm a school teacher from Boston. I have a life, a purpose. I came here to teach children not to become some what?" Thunderhawk's voice had a dangerous edge to it. Rebecca caught herself before she said something truly offensive, but the damage was already done. She could see the hurt and anger in his dark eyes. "I meant no disrespect," she said more quietly, "but you must understand this goes against everything I know. In my world, marriage requires consent from both parties, a proper ceremony, legal documents. And in my world, the spirits arrange meetings that change destinies," he replied. The jewelry has never been wrong before. They stared at each other across the dying fire, two people from completely different worlds trying to make sense of an impossible situation. "Surely there's some way to undo this," Rebecca said desperately. "Some Apache custom that allows for mistakes?" Thunderhawk was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Only the tribal council can dissolve a spirit marriage. We must travel to my village and ask the elders to judge our case." "How far is your village?" 3 days' ride. Rebecca's heart sank. 3 days traveling alone with this man through the desert, 3 days to figure out how to escape a marriage she'd never intended to enter. "I don't have a choice, do I?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "And neither do I." They ate breakfast in uncomfortable silence. Thunderhawk had 2 horses hidden in a nearby wash, a sturdy paint horse for himself and a gentler mare for Rebecca. She was grateful for her riding lessons back in Boston, though she'd never ridden in such wild country. As they set out across the desert, Rebecca tried to make conversation. "What should I call you?" "My white name is Tom," he said without looking at her. "But my people call me Thunderhawk." "Tom doesn't suit you at all," Rebecca said honestly. "You look more like a thunderhawk." She caught the slight smile that crossed his face before he controlled his expression again. "What's your name, schoolteacher?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Williams, Rebecca," he repeated as if testing how it felt in his mouth. "It means to bind in the ancient tongue." She shivered despite the growing heat of the day. Even her name seemed to be working against her. They rode in silence for several hours, stopping only to rest the horses and drink water from Thunderhawk's supplies. Rebecca was amazed by how he seemed to know exactly where he was going in the seemingly endless desert. That afternoon, they encountered their first real danger. Rebecca heard the thunder of hoofbeats before she saw the riders. 5 rough-looking men on sweating horses riding hard across the desert floor. "Cattle rustlers," Thunderhawk said grimly. "Hide behind those rocks," but it was too late. The men had seen them and were riding straight toward them. "Well, well," called the leader, a bearded man with cruel eyes. "What have we here?" "An Apache and his pretty white woman." Rebecca felt Thunderhawk tense beside her, but he kept his voice calm. "We're just traveling through. We want no trouble." "Maybe we don't want trouble either," said another man with a gold tooth. "Maybe we just want the woman. She's not going anywhere," Thunderhawk said, his hand moving subtly toward the knife at his belt. The leader laughed. 5 against 1, Apache. You do the math." What happened next was so fast that Rebecca could barely follow it. Thunderhawk moved like lightning, drawing his knife and a gun she hadn't known he was carrying. 2 of the men were on the ground before the others knew what was happening. The remaining 3 decided they wanted no part of a fight with someone so deadly. They grabbed their wounded companions and rode off, shouting threats over their shoulders. Rebecca stared at Thunderhawk in amazement. This quiet, careful man had just fought off 5 armed men to protect her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her over for injuries. "No, You saved my life." Again. Their eyes met and held for a moment. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "We should keep moving," Thunderhawk said, breaking the moment. "They might come back with more men." As they rode on, Rebecca found herself studying her reluctant husband with new eyes. He wasn't the savage she'd been taught to fear. He was intelligent, honorable, and brave. He'd risked his life for her without hesitation. Maybe this situation wasn't as hopeless as she'd thought. "Thunderhawk," she said as they made camp that evening. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, still not entirely trusting her change in attitude, but she could see something soften in his expression. "The tribal council will free you from this marriage," he said. "You'll be able to return to your teaching." For some reason, Rebecca felt a pang of disappointment at his words. But she pushed the feeling aside. Of course she wanted to be free. She had plans, goals, a life waiting for her, didn't she? As they settled down for the night, carefully maintaining distance between them this time, Rebecca touched the turquoise necklace at her throat. The stones felt warm against her skin, as if they contained some inner fire. She was beginning to understand that nothing about this journey would be simple. The Apache village was nothing like what Rebecca had expected. Instead of the wild, primitive camp she'd imagined, she found a well-organized community nestled in a hidden valley. Adobe houses mixed with traditional wickiups, children played games in the dust, and women worked together preparing food and crafts. But as Thunderhawk led her through the village, Rebecca could feel dozens of eyes watching her every move. Conversations stopped as they passed. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few displayed open hostility. "Your bride is very pale," said an older woman in Apache, not knowing Rebecca had picked up enough of the language during their journey to understand basic words. "Like a ghost," agreed another. "Will she blow away in the first strong wind?" Thunderhawk spoke sharply to them in their own language, defending Rebecca. but she could tell this was going to be harder than she'd hoped. The most challenging moment came when they reached Thunderhawk's family dwelling. An elderly woman emerged from the adobe house, clearly someone important by the way others stepped back respectfully. "Grandmother," Thunderhawk said in English, "this is Rebecca." The old woman's dark eyes studied Rebecca with the intensity of a hawk examining its prey. Her gray hair was braided with silver ornaments, and her weathered face told stories of decades in the harsh desert. "So," she said in perfectly clear English that surprised Rebecca, "you are the one who wears my jewelry." Rebecca touched the turquoise necklace nervously. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what it meant when I accepted it. I was half unconscious from the storm." "The spirits don't make mistakes, child," the grandmother said. "I am Elena Nighthawk, and you will call me grandmother, as is proper for a daughter-in-law." Before Rebecca could protest, another voice cut through the air like a blade. "She is not his wife." Rebecca turned to see a beautiful Apache woman approaching. She was about Rebecca's age, with long black hair adorned with feathers and silver, wearing traditional dress that showed off her graceful figure. "Morning Star," Thunderhawk said carefully. "Rebecca, this is my childhood friend." But Rebecca could see immediately that Morning Star was much more than a friend. The way she looked at Thunderhawk, the possessive anger in her dark eyes, this was a woman who had expected to marry him herself. "I have waited for you for 3 summers, Morning Star said to Thunderhawk in Apache, then switched to English for Rebecca's benefit. "Now you bring home this pale stranger who knows nothing of our ways." "The marriage ceremony was performed according to our customs," Grandmother Elena said firmly. "Morning Star, you must accept what the spirits have chosen." Morning Star's eyes flashed dangerously, but she didn't argue with the respected elder. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving tension thick in the air. "Don't mind her," Elena said to Rebecca. "She'll come to accept it in time. Now let me see these hands." She took Rebecca's hands in her own weathered ones, examining them with a critical eye. "Soft," Elena pronounced. "Like a baby's. Can you cook? So gather plants, tend animals?" "I can teach," Rebecca said, lifting her chin with pride. "I can read and write in 3 languages. I know mathematics, geography, history." Elena looked unimpressed. "Can you birth a child? Treat fever, set a broken bone? Defend your family?" Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "No, but then you have much to learn, granddaughter. We'll start tomorrow." That first week was the hardest of Rebecca's life. Elena woke her before dawn every day for lessons in survival. She learned to grind corn into meal, to identify edible and medicinal plants, to weave baskets and repair clothing. Her soft hands became blistered and calloused. Her fair skin burned despite the protective clothing Elena provided. She made mistake after mistake, burning food, cutting herself with knives, getting lost on simple gathering trips. Some of the women began to warm to her when they saw how hard she was trying, but others, led by Morning Star, made their displeasure clear at every opportunity. "She can't even start a fire without burning herself," Morning Star said loudly one afternoon, as Rebecca struggled with flint and steel. "How will she keep Thunderhawk warm in winter?" Rebecca's temper finally snapped. She stood up, her hands still stinging from the spark burns, and faced Morning Star directly. "I may not have grown up in the desert," she said in her carefully learned Apache, "but I'm not stupid and I'm not weak. I came here to help children learn. That's still my purpose, whether I'm married or not." The watching women murmured in surprise at her use of their language. Even Morning Star looked taken aback. "You want to teach our children white man's ways?" Morning Star challenged. "I want to teach them to read and write so they can survive in a changing world," Rebecca replied. "So they can understand the treaties your men are forced to sign. So they can speak for themselves instead of depending on interpreters who might lie." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Everyone knew that the ability to read English could mean the difference between life and death when dealing with government officials. That evening, as Rebecca sat by the fire treating her burned hands with salve Elena had made, Thunderhawk approached. "You spoke well today," he said, sitting beside her. "Morning Star thinks I'm useless." "Morning Star is afraid," he said quietly. "She sees the old ways disappearing. White settlers take more land every year. The government makes new rules that push our people onto smaller and smaller reservations. She thinks accepting you means accepting defeat." Rebecca looked at his profile in the firelight. "What do you think?" I think survival sometimes means adapting, he said. I work with government officials, trying to protect our people's interests. It's not popular, but it's necessary. You never told me you work with the government. Thunderhawk was quiet for a moment. I translate at treaty meetings. I help settle disputes between our people and white settlers. I try to find peaceful solutions when others want to fight. Rebecca began to understand the impossible position he was in, caught between two worlds, trusted by neither side completely. That must be lonely, she said softly. He looked at her with surprise, as if no one had ever recognized the personal cost of his choices. The messenger is often blamed for the message, he agreed. Before Rebecca could respond, shouts erupted from the edge of the village. Riders were approaching fast, white men with badges and guns. Territorial marshals, Thunderhawk said grimly, standing quickly. They're looking for someone. Rebecca's blood ran cold as she recognized the man leading the group. It was James Crawford, a government official she'd met briefly in Tucson before continuing to her teaching post. Miss Williams, Crawford called out when he spotted her. Thank God you're alive. We've been searching for you since the stagecoach incident. Rebecca stood slowly, very aware of the Apache people gathering around them, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. I'm fine, Mr. Crawford, she said carefully. These people saved my life. Crawford's eyes took in her Apache clothing, the turquoise jewelry, her sun-darkened skin. His expression grew hard. Miss Williams, you've clearly been through a terrible ordeal, but you're safe now. We're here to take you back to civilization. I'm not going anywhere, Rebecca said quietly. The words surprised everyone, including herself. She hadn't planned to say them. But as she looked around at the faces of people who had become important to her, Elena with her tough love, Thunderhawk with his quiet strength, even Morningstar with her fierce loyalty to her people, Rebecca realized something had changed inside her. She belonged here. Miss Williams, Crawford said in a patronizing tone, you're obviously not thinking clearly. You've been held captive by these savages. No one is holding me captive, Rebecca said firmly, and these people are not savages. They saved my life, fed me, taught me, welcomed me into their family. Crawford's hand moved toward his gun. Several Apache men stepped forward, including Thunderhawk, ready to defend their village. Rebecca moved quickly to stand between the two groups. Mr. Crawford, she said loudly, I appreciate your concern, but I'm staying here of my own free will. Please leave peacefully. Crawford stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. Miss Williams, you can't possibly be serious. You're an educated woman from a good family. You have duties, responsibilities. Yes, Rebecca said, lifting her chin proudly. I do have responsibilities, to my husband and his people. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Crawford's face turned red with anger, while the Apache people looked at Rebecca with new respect and acceptance. She had chosen her side, and there would be consequences for everyone. After Crawford and his men rode away with threats and angry words, the village felt like a pot ready to boil over. Rebecca could sense the fear beneath everyone's calm faces. Her public declaration had protected them for now, but it had also painted a target on the entire community. You've made things worse, Morningstar confronted her that evening. Now they'll bring more soldiers. They'll use you as an excuse to drive us from our homes. I couldn't let him take me, Rebecca said. This is my choice to make. Your choice affects all of us, Morningstar shot back. White woman's choices always do. The argument was interrupted by Thunderhawk's return from a scouting trip. His face was grim as he spoke quietly with the village elders. What is it? Rebecca asked when he approached their fire. Crawford's men are camped 5 miles east, he said. They're not leaving. And there are more coming. A full cavalry unit from the territorial capital. Rebecca felt sick. This is my fault. I should have gone with them. No, Elena said firmly, appearing beside them with her silent step. You made the right choice, granddaughter. But now we must all live with the consequences. Over the next few days, Rebecca threw herself into helping prepare for whatever was coming. She worked alongside the other women, learning faster than ever before. Fear, she discovered, was an excellent teacher. But it was during these intense days that something beautiful began to bloom between her and Thunderhawk. Working side by side, facing danger together, they started to see each other clearly for the first time. You don't have to do this, he told her one afternoon as she helped him check weapons and ammunition. Yes, I do, she replied, loading bullets into a rifle with steady hands. These people are my family now. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, really looked at her. Her soft Boston skin was now golden brown from the desert sun. Her gentle hands had grown strong and capable, but more than that, there was a fire in her green eyes that hadn't been there when they first met. You've changed, he said quietly. So have you, she replied. When I first saw you, I thought you were just another dangerous Apache warrior. But you're so much more than that. Their eyes met and held. For a moment, the dangerous situation outside the village faded away. There was only them. Two people who had started as strangers and were becoming something more. Rebecca, Thunderhawk said, reaching out to touch her face gently. When this is over, his words were cut off by urgent shouting from the village entrance. Riders were approaching fast, but these weren't soldiers. It was a small group of Apache men from a neighboring band, and they brought terrible news. The cavalry is moving, their leader announced. 50 men armed for war. They'll be here by tomorrow morning. Why? Elena demanded. We've broken no treaties. We've committed no crimes. The messenger's face was dark with anger. They say they're rescuing a white woman held against her will, but everyone knows the real reason. They want our water rights. They want to move us to the reservation in New Mexico. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Her presence had given them the excuse they'd been looking for to drive these people from their ancestral lands. I have to give myself up, she whispered. It's the only way to save the village. No, Thunderhawk said fiercely. I won't let them take you. And I won't let my people suffer because of me, she replied with equal determination. Elena stepped between them, her old eyes wise and sad. There is another way, she said quietly. But it is dangerous and we must all choose to take it together. She explained her plan. It was risky, requiring perfect timing and cooperation from everyone in the village. But it might be their only chance to avoid bloodshed while keeping their home. That night, as the village prepared to evacuate to hidden caves deeper in the canyon, Rebecca found herself alone with Thunderhawk for what might be the last time. I'm scared, she admitted as they sat by a small, concealed fire. So am I, he said, and his honesty surprised her. Not of dying, she clarified. I'm scared that I'll never get to know what this could have been. She gestured between them. We've been so focused on whether we should be married that we never explored whether we wanted to be. Thunderhawk was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. My grandmother says the spirits don't make mistakes. That storm brought you to me for a reason. And what do you think? He turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. I think that when I saw you stumbling through the desert, half dead from exposure, something in my chest recognized something in yours. Recognized what? The loneliness, he said simply. I've been alone my whole life, even when surrounded by people. Walking between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. But with you, you don't feel alone, she finished, understanding completely. And you? He asked. What do you feel? Rebecca had been asking herself the same question for days. I came west to teach children, to make a difference in the world. I thought that meant fighting ignorance with books and lessons. But now I think maybe I was meant to fight a different kind of ignorance. The kind that makes people fear each other instead of trying to understand. That's a dangerous fight to pick. The best fights usually are. Thunderhawk reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her calloused palm. If we survive tomorrow, when we survive tomorrow, she corrected firmly. He smiled at her certainty. When we survive tomorrow, I want to court you properly. Not as a wife forced on me by circumstances, but as a woman I choose to love. I'd like that, Rebecca whispered, her heart racing. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. Then, as if drawn by invisible strings, they leaned toward each other. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, a question asked and answered. But as Rebecca felt Thunderhawk's arms come around her, pulling her closer, the kiss deepened into something fierce and desperate. All the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks poured into that kiss. All the growing attraction, the respect, the love that had been building between them despite their resistance. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Now I know what I'm fighting for tomorrow, Thunderhawk said against her forehead. We both do, Rebecca agreed. They held each other through the night, not as strangers bound by accident, but as two people who had chosen each other despite impossible odds. When dawn came, they were ready to face whatever the day would bring. The cavalry arrived just as Elena had predicted, riding into what appeared to be a deserted village. But the Apache people were watching from the canyon walls above, and Rebecca was ready to play her part in the most important performance of her life. Everything depended on the next few hours as Thunderhawk squeezed her hand, one last time before they separated to take their positions. Rebecca felt the turquoise jewelry pulse warm against her skin. Whatever happened next, she was no longer the frightened Boston schoolteacher who had stumbled into the desert weeks ago. She was an Apache woman, and she would fight for her people with everything she had. The cavalry thundered into the empty village just as the sun reached its peak. 50 armed soldiers led by a stern-faced captain, with Crawford riding beside him looking triumphant. "Spread out," the captain ordered. "Search every dwelling. Find the woman." From her hiding place in the rocks above, Rebecca watched the soldiers tear through the village. Her heart pounded as she waited for Elena's signal. Everything had to be perfectly timed. Then she saw him, Richard Thornton, her former fiancé from Boston, riding with the officers. Her blood turned to ice. Crawford must have telegraphed him when they couldn't convince her to leave voluntarily. "Rebecca," Richard called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I know you're here." "Your family sent me to bring you home." Rebecca closed her eyes, steeling herself for what came next. Then she stood up on the canyon rim where everyone could see her. "I'm here, Richard," she called down. Every head turned toward her voice. She stood proud and straight, wearing a Apache dress, her skin golden from the desert sun, the turquoise jewelry glinting in the sunlight. Richard's face went white with shock. "My God, Rebecca, what have they done to you?" "They saved my life," she replied clearly. "They welcomed me into their family. They showed me who I really am." "You're Rebecca Williams from Boston," Richard shouted. "You're engaged to me. You have duties, responsibilities. I broke our engagement in a letter I sent 3 months ago," Rebecca said. "I told you I was moving west to start a new life. You can't possibly mean to stay here living like a savage." The word rang through the canyon like a gunshot. Rebecca felt Thunderhawk tense in his hiding place nearby. She saw Morningstar's hand move toward her knife. The entire situation balanced on a knife's edge. "These people are not savages," Rebecca said, her voice carrying to every soldier below. "They're farmers, healers, teachers, parents. They've lived in this land for generations, harming no one, asking only to be left in peace." "Miss Williams," the cavalry captain called up. "I'm Captain Hayes. I've been ordered to escort you safely back to Tucson. Please come down so we can resolve this peacefully." Rebecca took a deep breath. This was the moment Elena's plan depended on. "Captain Hayes," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I need you to understand something very important." She paused, letting the tension build. "I am here by my own free choice. I am married to Thunderhawk of the Chiricahua Apache according to both Apache and territorial law." "That's impossible," Richard sputtered. "You can't marry a... That marriage isn't legal." "Actually it is," Rebecca continued calmly. "Under Territorial Statute 247, marriages performed according to Native American custom are recognized by the territorial government. I have witnesses, including U.S. Marshal Crawford here, who saw me acknowledge the marriage voluntarily." Crawford's face turned purple with rage. "You were obviously coerced." "Was I coerced when I chose to stay after you offered to take me away?" Rebecca asked sweetly. "Was I coerced when I publicly declared my marriage in front of 5 armed U.S. Marshals?" Captain Hayes looked uncomfortable. He'd been expecting a simple rescue mission, not a legal quagmire. "Miss Williams," he said carefully, "even if the marriage is legal, surely you can see that this situation is untenable. There are tensions between our peoples." "Yes, there are," Rebecca agreed. "And do you know why, Captain?" Without waiting for an answer, she continued her speech, the most important one of her life. "Because people on both sides refuse to see each other as human beings. Because white settlers want land without caring who they displace. Because some Apache groups raid settlements without thinking of innocent families. Because government officials make promises they never intend to keep." She gestured toward the village below. But this community has tried to find a different way. They've honored every treaty. They've helped lost travelers regardless of color. They've shared water during droughts and medical knowledge during sickness outbreaks. That may be true, Captain Hayes said, but my orders are clear. Your orders, Rebecca interrupted, are to rescue a white woman being held against her will. But I'm not being held against my will. I'm choosing to stay. This is ridiculous, Richard exploded. Rebecca, you've obviously been brainwashed or threatened or enchanted somehow. This isn't the woman I knew. You're right, Rebecca said, and her voice softened. I'm not the same woman you knew. The woman you knew was afraid to make waves, afraid to challenge expectations, afraid to follow her heart. She looked directly at Richard, seeing him clearly for the first time. I would have made you miserable, Richard. And you would have made me miserable. We both deserve better than that. As she spoke, Thunderhawk emerged from his hiding place, moving to stand in clear view below her. One by one, other Apache people appeared, on canyon walls, behind rocks and doorways. They had been there all along, watching, ready to defend their home. The soldiers suddenly realized they were surrounded by people they couldn't see or count. Captain Hayes's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, then stopped as he realized the tactical impossibility of his position. Captain, Thunderhawk called out in perfect English. My name is Thunderhawk, also called Tom Nighthawk. I work as a translator and liaison for the territorial government. My wife and I want no trouble with you or your men. You speak English, Captain Hayes said, surprised. I also read and write it, Thunderhawk replied. I've read the territorial laws regarding marriage. I know our union is legal. I also know that attacking peaceful Apache people on their own land without provocation would violate federal treaties. Elena Nighthawk appeared next to Thunderhawk, carrying a leather pouch. Captain Hayes, she said in clear English, I have here copies of every treaty signed between our band and the territorial government. We have honored every agreement. We've committed no crimes. We've given you no reason to bring soldiers to our home. She held up the papers. Unless your real purpose is to drive us from our water rights so your government friends can sell the land to mining companies. The captain's face flushed. Elena had hit very close to the truth. That's a serious accusation, he said stiffly. It's a serious situation, Elena replied calmly. Rebecca chose that moment to make her final move. She began climbing down the canyon wall with the sure-footed grace she'd learned from weeks in the desert. Rebecca, no, Richard called out. Don't go near those people. But Rebecca walked straight to Thunderhawk and took his hand in front of everyone. These people are my family, she said clearly. This man is my husband. This land is my home. She turned to face the assembled soldiers. I know some of you have families back home, wives who love you, children who need you. Ask yourselves, would you want some foreign army to come and drag your wives away from everything they hold dear? Several of the younger soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca's words were hitting home. Captain Hayes, she continued, you seem like an honorable man. I'm asking you to honor the law you've sworn to uphold. I'm a free citizen making a free choice. Please respect that choice. Captain Hayes looked around at the canyon walls, at the armed Apache people, at his own nervous soldiers. Then he looked at Rebecca, sunburned, confident, clearly healthy and unharmed. Miss Williams, he said slowly, if I leave you here, there will be questions. My superiors will demand explanations. Tell them the truth, Rebecca said. Tell them you found me safe, and married to a man who works with the territorial government. Tell them the Apache people here are peaceful and law-abiding. She paused, then played her final card. And tell them that removing me by force would violate not only territorial marriage law, but also the federal laws protecting Native American religious practices. The marriage ceremony was a sacred religious ritual. Captain Hayes was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the political nightmare that would result from forcibly removing a legally married white woman from her Apache husband. We'll camp outside the canyon tonight, he said finally. In the morning, I want to speak with you privately, Miss Williams. If you still choose to stay, we'll return to Tucson. Richard started to protest, but the captain cut him off. That's my decision, Mr. Thornton. As the soldiers made camp outside the village, Rebecca felt the tension slowly drain from her body. They'd won this battle, but the war for acceptance and understanding would continue. That night, the village celebrated with a feast. For the first time since Rebecca's arrival, Morningstar approached her without hostility. You fought well today, the Apache woman said grudgingly. Maybe you do belong here. I'd like to be friends, Rebecca offered. Morningstar considered this. Perhaps. If you can learn to weave a decent basket, Rebecca laughed. I'll keep practicing. Later, as the celebration wound down, Rebecca and Thunderhawk walked to their favorite spot overlooking the village. No regrets? He asked. Rebecca looked out over the desert that had become her home, at the stars that had witnessed their unlikely love story, at the man who had become her anchor in this new world. Only one, she said. Thunderhawk's face fell. What? I regret that it took a sandstorm and a case of mistaken marriage for me to find where I belong. He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the desert night. The spirits work in mysterious ways, he said, echoing his grandmother's favorite saying. Speaking of your grandmother, Rebecca said,